This is Dream Power Radio, the place where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Dream Power Show. I'm your host, certified dream life coach, Debbie Spector-Weissman. This is the show where we talk about dreams, both daytime and nighttime dreams, and how you can use them to create a life you love. And remember, I'm here to help you understand your dreams. So if you've got a dream that's got you stumped, email me at debbie@dreampowerradio.com. I can help you interpret your dream or even answer any questions you may have about dreaming. So again, my email is debbie@dreampowerradio.com. Well, today's show is going to be maybe sounding a little strange or even spooky to some of you. We're going to be talking about a subject that I have found to be very useful both in my personal life and in my coaching practice, and that's dowsing. I first heard about dowsing about 30 years ago when my husband and I were building a house, a country house that we actually are still living in at this point. The house is on a hill, and we had to dig a well. Well, if you know anything about well drillers, they charge by the foot. So it was in our interest to find a way to dig as shallow a well as we could possibly get. And that's when somebody in the town suggested that we contact the town barber, who actually was a dowser. Well, at the time, I had no idea what dowsing was, but I figured we had nothing to lose. So we hired him to come up to the property. So he came up and he had this big Y-shaped stick that he brought with him. And then he started to walk around the property, the building site. And within minutes, the stick just sort of magically turned downward. And he said, "This is it. This is a spot. Dig here. You're going to find water." Well, again, we figured we had nothing to lose. So when the well driller came up, we told him this is the spot to dig the water, to dig for the well. And they found water at about 100 feet down. Now that may sound like a lot, but our hill was about 700 feet above the ground below it. And we were fearful we would have to dig 800 feet to find a well. So only to find water at 100 feet was wonderful to us. So that showed me the value of dowsing. But at the time, I thought that was all there was to know about dowsing. However, thanks to my guests today, they've helped me see there's so much more to do with this very useful tool. Maggie and Nigel Percy actually met through their love of dowsing. The business they started, 6 Sense Consulting, has helped educate tons of people about the value of dowsing. And their website, Discovering Dowsing, is the largest free dowsing site on the internet. So with all that, welcome to the Dream Power Show, Maggie and Nigel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Lovely to be here, Debbie.
Oh, my pleasure as well. So I know dowsing is much more than just about finding water. But can you tell us your definition of dowsing?
I suppose the simplest, shortest definition is dowsing is focused intuition. Instead of getting an intuitive hit about anything as you're going through the day, you can actually tune in to get an answer about something that you want, but it's done in not using the rational or logical or analytical part of the mind. How about you? Do that bit of that?
Yeah. It's a way of expanding your intelligence in a sense. Your rational mind and your physical senses gather a lot of facts and data so that you can make good choices in life.
Yeah.
And you have an equal number of intuitive sensing abilities. And if you tap into them, it just gives you more information to make better choices.
So it's an informational tool, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So how did the two of you discover dowsing?
Do you want to go first?
Well, yeah, my story is perhaps a bit more ordinary than yours. I think a lot of people stumble on dowsing in the course of exploring other metaphysical topics like energy healing, and that's how I stumbled across dowsing. It was in my Karuna Reiki Master Teacher class. The teacher, it was like a 2-day class or a 3-day class, and the teacher pulled out a pendulum at one point during the class, and she started checking chakras. She had one of the students lie on a massage table, and she was holding the pendulum over and asking him how the function of the chakras were. And I was just totally fascinated by how much information she was able to get just using that pendulum. And all of us students each of us bought one of her custom-made pendulums, and we were practicing with them back at the motel that night and laughing and having a lot of fun with it. And I just decided I had to know more about what this dowsing was, and so I just plunged into it after that.
My introduction was slightly different in that I was in England at the time, and I was going to visit an open air agricultural museum. I can't remember why. Anyway, I was walking from the car park to the entrance to the museum when, out of nowhere, I actually did literally hear a voice saying, "Learn dowsing." And I was like, I looked around and I sort of ignored it really. I carried on, went through the thing and all the exhibits there, came to the shop, the gift shop, and they had this little rotating rack of books, and one of them was, I still got it, it's a tiny little thing, about dowsing. And I went, okay, so I bought it. And I read it through 4 or 5 times in one go. And I just decided to try it on everything. And that's really how I started. It was very strange, but it worked.
And the rest is history.
Yes.
Yes, you could say that.
Yeah.
The two of you wrote a book a while back called 101 Amazing Things You Can Do with Dowsing. So can you tell us a few of them?
Well, that's one of the many books we've written on dowsing, and it's the one that we give away for free. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere else for free in digital form. And the whole purpose behind the book is we've heard so often people say, well, what can I use dowsing for? I can dowse over my supplements and find out how many to take or how long to take them or what brand to get, but then they run out of ideas as to what can I use dowsing for. So it's a full-length book, and it's got several chapters. It's got a whole chapter on everyday applications that you can start using dowsing on that aren't really critical, but they're fun and they can help you out. Like when you're at a restaurant, what item on the menu would you most enjoy for lunch that day? Or which movie should you rent if you want to have a nice, relaxing, enjoyable evening? And just various everyday things like that in that chapter. And then going on to more and more important things like making major life choices about health, about money, about relationships, about your job and career, finding out about the environmental energies that are affecting you, that sort of thing. There are just so many applications. And the book goes into quite a few of them, well, over 101, literally. And it also gives good questions, because formulating a good question is one of the big challenges people have when they're beginning to dowse. Yeah. And so it really gets people started and lets them see the possibilities of what dowsing can do for them.
Yeah, because most people, like yourself, met or were introduced to dowsing through dowsing for water. And that's probably the most common association with dowsing, because it's a very, very old use of dowsing, but there is so much more. Gardening, you can work out where's the best place to put plants or things like that, or what the plants need.
There's a section in the book.
Yeah.
And for your pets.
Yeah.
All kinds of applications.
Yeah.
So can you give me an example of how dowsing really made a difference in someone's life, even in your life?
Yeah, we met.
Well, the story of how we met is always a good one. I mean, you know how when you meet you meet somebody, you get an impression sometimes intuitively about whether you kind of want to back off from that person or whether you're very attracted to them. You think meant to be something more important in your life than just a pen pal or whatever. And when Nigel and I met back in 2000, there was no Facebook or anything like that. It was just like an email group about dowsing called the Digital Dowsers. And there were a bunch of people, and all, you didn't have pictures or anything. There were no biographies or anything. And I joined this group to learn about dowsing because I was fairly new to it, and I was really eager to learn as much as I could. And he was in the group, and he welcomed me to the group in an email. And I pretty soon found out most of the people weren't talking that much about dowsing. So I asked him if maybe we could email about dowsing, and he said sure, and that's what we did. And after a while I was getting these intuitive feelings like he's meant to be more than just like a dowsing friend or a dowsing buddy or whatever. And so I dowsed about it. Now this was I suppose at the time I didn't realize how huge an impact it was going to have on my health. But I thought, there maybe he's just meant to be a friend. Maybe he's just meant to be a dowsing buddy. Maybe but I feel like he's meant to be something more. But I didn't have the courage to just jump on that intuitive feeling with so little information. And so I dowsed about it. And I dowsed that he was meant to be my life partner. And when I got that answer, then that prompted me to quit my job and put all my stuff in storage and travel to the UK to meet him. Of course, after I broached the subject with him about it, was he getting the feeling there was more to this relationship than, but the dowsing was what gave me the courage to follow through on the intuitive feeling I had, it was strong, but sometimes you can just shove those aside if they're too radical and strange, whereas the dowsing really gave me the courage to go through it, and it's totally changed my life. And that's just one of the many examples of dowsing changing life for the better.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and because it's a method of accessing your intuition on demand almost, it doesn't necessarily have such a splash effect as when we were using it, but because of that, it can significantly alter the quality of your life over time. Because you're able to choose more beneficial outcomes and foods and services and ways of living or whatever, so it can have a significant impact, as it did with us.
It has an impact beyond just dowsing and getting useful answers, which you then implement to change your life for the better. Because if you want to master dowsing, you have to learn proper technique, which interestingly requires you to drop fear, not be ruled by fear, because you want to be able to hear your intuition, and to be detached about outcomes, to have goals, very clear goals, and to be able to focus on them. And it turns out that the things that are required for masterful dowsing are also the things that all the gurus say are basically going to take you closer to enlightenment. They give you a more harmonious life, a more peaceful life, take you out of the chaos and all that sort of thing.
One of the things that I find fascinating about dowsing, and it's not something that I practice, but something that I know you practice, is dowsing for health issues. You touched upon it earlier when you talked about dowsing about whether these supplements are the right ones I should use. But can you talk a little bit more about dowsing for health?
Well, that's another example of how dowsing can really contribute in ways beyond just by giving you good answers that you can't get with your rational mind. Because I think once you decide you're going to start dowsing for your health, it puts you in a very empowered position where you have to think about, well, you can't really dowse about anything unless you have goals. And many people, like me, discover they didn't really have that many goals about health. And it forces you to think, well, what would I like to create in terms of health? And it makes you think about your goals so that you can then formulate questions about how can you achieve those goals. And it makes you think about positive goals rather than getting rid of pain, because you want to know how you can feel more comfortable in your body, or you want to be able to sleep better at night, or you want your digestion to be comfortable, and you want to get rid of an allergy you have or something like that. And all those things are possible with dowsing. but it starts out by kind of putting you into a very empowered position where you say, I want to take charge of my health. I want to create better health. And this is what I want to create. And then you use dowsing to figure out how you can get the outcomes you want. And you can dowse about diet, exercise, allergies, remedies, therapies, side effects of this and that. I mean, it's just, we just published a book last fall on dowsing for health. I mean, you can go into all kinds of detail, and you can use it for yourself, you can use it for your children, your pets. I mean, it's just an amazing application, and it can really, it can save you so much time, effort, and money in addition to giving you better outcomes. And it's one of the most popular applications of dowsing, and yet it is one of the more challenging to learn because it is a fairly complex issue. You know, when you're dowsing for water, you've got like one question: where's the water? And it's a long question, but it's always the same question, and with very few tweaks. But for health dowsing, there are lots of questions, and so it's a little more challenging to learn, but the benefits are absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, they are, certainly.
That's great. We're going to take a short break here. We are talking about dowsing with my guests, Nigel and Maggie Percy. Want to know more about remembering your dreams and what they mean? Want practical tools to help you really live the life of your dreams? I'm Debbie Spector-Weissman, the Dream Coach. For powerful wisdom you can use, sign up for my newsletter today at dreampowerradio.com. It's free.
Welcome back to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Yes, welcome back to the Dream Power Show. I'm your host, Certified Dream Life Coach, Debbie Spector-Weissman, and we're talking about dowsing with Nigel and Maggie Percy. Nigel and Maggie, with all of the positive benefits surrounding dowsing, why do you think it remains such a mystery?
Good question, actually.
When you say mystery, do you mean that's kind of an undiscovered sort of wonderful thing that so few people know about? Is that what you mean?
Why do so few people know about it when it has all of these wonderful benefits that are easily accessible?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
It is a good question. I think one of the things is that, as I said earlier, people tend to associate dowsing with a very few activities, water dowsing being, the most obvious one. That's an accepted fact. But if you go from water dowsing to dowsing about health, there doesn't seem to be any connection. They seem to be entirely different things, and they're not. It's actually exactly the same process, but applied to a different area of study. So I think the association with water and also with mineral dowsing, that was another early occupation, has made it seem quite limited to observers, to natural observers. And whenever you get journalists doing the occasional piece on dowsing, they will normally get a dowser to show them how to use a tool, and they use it to water or something like that. But that's pretty much it. So the publicity around dowsing tends to make it a narrow-looking subject. But the difficulty is actually extending that awareness to make it more relevant, more useful, more widely useful to everybody.
I think part of the problem, in addition to that, is that there are so few people actually using dowsing, other than water dowsers, for practical purposes, measurable purposes, that really show how powerful it is. That when you do get the rare media person willing to interview somebody, if they're not talking about water dowsing, then you hear a lot of people dabble with dowsing and things that can't be proven, what you might call intangible target dowsing, like do I have a guardian angel, or what was my past life, my last past life like, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then because of that, it makes it a little harder for skeptics or non-believers to get on board with it, because they don't, number one, they're not interested in those things, and number two, they don't believe what you're saying. They think you're out in the ozone somewhere, you've been smoking something funny. And whereas dowsing can be a very practical thing, but most people don't use it for practical things that reinforce how powerful it is and how helpful it is. Most people are using it on things that can't be measured. And I think that causes people to think that it's one of these new age foo-foo things that has very little usefulness, or it isn't real. In a sense, it's easier to be skeptical. Whereas if I can give you 5 examples of how I've used dowsing and it changed my life, saved me thousands of dollars, this, that, or the other, then you might listen to me.
Yeah.
But there aren't enough people that are able to do that.
No, and I think there's also a cultural bias as well. Particularly the US, particularly, or US people generally, and it has to be a generalization, so anybody that doesn't apply to it, I apologize. But generally, in the US, there's a greater interest in and use of dowsing for, let's call it spiritual matters, like Maggie said, the guides, the angels, past lives, whatever. In the UK, where I learned dowsing when I grew up, it's a far more practical affair. And that's also true in, for example, France. France, it's a recognised profession, and it's used extensively for health dowsing, very practical applications. So I think there is this sort of cultural shift between, from either side of the Atlantic. But, America is a hugely populous country, and that tends to have like a knock-on effect. So American attitudes towards dowsing, I think, do tend to push a little over towards the Atlantic, across the Atlantic as well. But there's a more practical background and depth to European dowsing, which is not as prevalent or as widely accepted in the US. Doesn't mean to say one is better than the other at all. It's just a slight difference of emphasis.
Well, yeah, and the lack of the practical aspect is what keeps it from getting traction.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
because it's not a very mainstream
Yes.
usage.
No, it isn't.
My next question is, can anybody learn how to dowse?
Oh yes. Well, anybody. When I was in the UK and I was fanatical about dowsing, I would try and see people who would dowse, and I only got one person who couldn't get a response from a dowsing instrument. I've seen estimates over a long period of time saying something like between 80 and 90% of the population can dowse. And it seems to be fairly accurate, I think.
I've found from being in and teaching lots of courses that, and of course that's kind of a self-selected sample, because if somebody comes to a class, they want to learn to dowse. You do occasionally have somebody who has problems with one tool. Me, for example, when I first picked up, I was fine with the pendulum, but my friend who was in the Karuna Reiki Master Teacher class, her pendulum would not move for anything. And when I was in the first dowsing class I took, my L rod in my left hand went nuts, and the one in the right hand was just holding still. And what we found was it was usually past life issues with fear of being burned at the stake for being a witch or something like that, for using your intuition. And as soon as you do a little brief statement of intention, bam, the tools start working again. So I would say, of people who want to learn to dowse, and I think anybody can learn to dowse and can overcome challenges, but it's not something that necessarily appeals to everybody, or that everybody has. It's a skill. So it's kind of like there's going to be certain people have an inclination towards it, and certain people will have certain personality traits that make them learn it faster, or maybe catch on quicker. Because among intuitive techniques, dowsing is probably one of the only ones that actually uses the rational mind, even a little bit, really. Because, you know, if you're, obviously you're going to have to use your rational mind, whether you're a tarot reader or crystal healer or whatever, but dowsing forces you to sit down, make a goal, figure out a question, and do a lot of rational stuff before you even get into a dowsing state, and ask the question so you can get the answer. And so people who are more verbally inclined, who are good with words, who like to use words, who are a little bit analytical, you'll see lots of scientists and engineers learning dowsing.
One of the things you touched on a little bit earlier was that to be a good dowser, you have to ask the right questions. What do you mean by asking the right questions?
Oh, okay. Again, good question. A good question in itself. The right question is the one which will give you, first of all, helpful information. If it just gives you information which isn't helpful to you, the area of your study, it's not a good question. It might be an interesting question, but it won't be a good one. So it also has to be able to be answered in a simple binary fashion, yes or no. There are ways of fudging around that, but that's essentially what it is. So asking a good question involves taking into account as many aspects of the situation as you can conceive of. So, for example, let's say a bad question would be: you're standing in a store, and you think you might like you might like some wine with your dinner that night. So you look at the bottle and say, "Is that wine good for me?" That's a really bad question, because what do you mean by good and beneficial health? In terms of health or taste or whatever else. And what do you mean by that wine? Is it 1 glass, 2 glasses, the entire bottle drunk over a period of 1 hour, or over a period of 2 days? In other words, that's a very vague question. So to make that a good question, you need to incorporate the same as what, where, how, why, and when. Those are the six ingredients of a journalist has to include the story.
Go through each one for that particular question.
So who is, you're the person drinking it. What, that particular wine in that bottle. Where, well, at your home, that's not really as vital. Who, what, where, how are you going to drink it? Are you going to drink it over a period of days, or are you going to have 1 glass
with food,
yeah. 1 glass before, 1 glass? In other words, be precise as to how you're going to have that. Who, what, where, how, why? Because you actually want it.
If you want to get drunk, the answer is going to be different.
Yeah, and when you've got the when is also included in that how part. Is it going to be this evening, next evening? Period of 5 minutes, 5 hours, or whatever.
So throw a question together.
Okay, so how much on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being absolutely wonderful, 0 being really bad, would I enjoy 1 glass of this wine with my meal this evening?
Most of your good dowsing questions are surprisingly long and detailed, and that's exactly the opposite from what new dowsers want to do. They just want to say, is this vitamin C good for me? Well, any vitamin C is good for you. I mean, that's the definition of a vitamin, is you need it. That's really kind of a vague and useless question, and people, that's when people start stumbling, because they just rather get a quick answer, and they don't want to sit down and think about all these details. But that's kind of necessary if you want good information.
We're reaching the end of our time, so I just want to ask you, how can people get in touch with you and find out more about you?
First of all, we are no longer Sixth Sense Consulting, because we've given up the consulting part of our job. We are instead Sixth Sense Solutions.
But come see us at discoveringdowsing.com.
Yep.
That's our free dowsing website. There's tons of free stuff there. We've got a YouTube channel called Discovering Dowsing, surprisingly enough. And our books can be seen at sixcentesbooks.com.
Yeah, there's about 20 books on dowsing.
We've got over 20 books, most of them on dowsing, some on related topics. So
Yeah.
if you visit any of our sites, you can contact us through the
Yeah.
site if you have questions. And we're always happy to answer questions for
Yeah,
people. So
Absolutely.
feel
Great.
free to visit the website and look around and ask us a question.
Yeah,
Great.
happy to help.
Nigel and Maggie, thank you so much for being with me on the Dream Power Show today. We've been speaking with dowsing experts Nigel and Maggie Percy. I'm Debbie Spector-Weissman. Thank you for joining us today. And until next time, sweet dreams, everybody.
You've been listening to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman. For more information on Debbie or to sign up for her newsletter, go to dreampowerradio.com. This has been Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International.